Welcome back, everyone. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are. Here we are for our second new class for this series from Bodhi Tree Buddhism. We're continuing on, as we did last week, with a study of the book called The Way to Buddhahood by Venerable Master Yin Shun, the great contemporary Chinese monk, scholar, teacher, one of the inspirations for the movement known as humanistic Buddhism. So welcome back. Glad everyone can join us today. As I said, we're continuing on from last week. We're just doing little short sections for each session. And today we are continuing on with this idea of refuge, which is really the start of the path. So let's flip on over and have a look at our text and jump straight on in. Today we're picking up from this point here. It's got a little subtitle, Seeking Refuge in Things Beyond This World. Maybe we should do like a tiny little recap of what we had earlier. So just scroll up here. Right, we began with this idea of refuge in general and this question, you know, in the sea of existence, so in samsaric existence, where is our refuge? Where is our sanctuary? Where is our place of support? In all this changing world, everything's impermanent, subject to change, and it goes through a number of like examples here, you know, possessions that we have and lose, status, fame, connections with other people, even, you know, the nations in which we live and the whole of our societies and even civilization, they're not actually stable. And just made a note there, you know, this is true independent of what time period we're talking about. But I think, you know, these last few years have been a real sign of how chaotic the world can become, and quite beyond our control. So this was our starting point last week, this idea of, you know, in this, shall we say, chaos, really, where is our place of support? Where is our refuge? Now, the text then moves on, you know, so it's going through here talking about things, you know, is our refuge in money? Is money going to save us? Is power or social status going to change us? Can we turn to nationalism? Is that going to save us? And the answer to all of these things is no. All of these are impermanent and subject to change. Then the text takes a little step up and then asks the question of, you know, seeking refuge in things beyond this world. Now, we do have to be a little bit careful here about this phrase beyond this world, particularly in a Buddhist context. Often in a Buddhist context, when we say beyond the world, we make this contrast between, shall we say, samsaric existence and, you know, nirvanic liberation. So there are some specifically Buddhist terms that make these distinctions here. The world in Buddhist terms doesn't so much mean like the physical world in which we live. It's got this sense of like our own personal, individual, subjective worlds, but also the world is like the mundane, and it's the world of suffering, dissatisfaction, and so on. And beyond this world, usually in most Buddhist discussions, it refers to, you know, freedom from that mundane suffering existence. Here, though, it doesn't quite mean that. Here it just means beyond the usual the world of you know, human interaction and doing your job, having your family and your social life, and up to your, you know, country as natural level, you know, human civilization, shall we say. And this is talking about things that are beyond just like the human realm, higher than the human realm, but not talking about liberation. So the very first line here, as we're going to see, so we'll do what we did last week. We'll read through the Chinese and then we'll have a look at the English. So 鬼神好相杀，一天当主义，毒贩一满住，一非鬼一处。Spirits and deities delight in violent murder. The desire realm gods indulge in craving. The lone Brahma dwells in conceit. None of them are a place of refuge. Now, the phrasing of this is kind of nestled within a Buddhist cosmology. So maybe we need to just kind of clarify that. Some of you may be more familiar with Buddhist cosmology and talking about these different types of, should we say, higher beings. But I think it still helps to clarify it. So in the Buddhist sense, in Buddhist sort of cosmology, you've got various like levels of different beings. In short, we usually talk about the 5 realms or the 6 realms of beings. And they start from, at the top, they talk about the gods or the deities, whichever term you want to use, the divine. Then you go down a bit, and some systems of Buddhist cosmology then talk about what are known as asuras, which are kind of like titans. They're like higher than humans, but they're kind of like the lower divine level. So titans is actually works good. If you know like a bit of Greek mythology, the titans and the gods are very closely related, right? Then we go to the human realm. And then below the human realm, you've got 3 other levels. So you've got like animals, then you've got what's often translated as hungry ghosts, but I like to translate as like just like spirits, different forms of spirits. And then below that, the beings in hell. So the gods or the deities, the asuras, titans, humans, animals, spirits, hell beings. Now, of course, when we're talking about refuge, we're not going to say, I take refuge in beings in hell, or I take refuge in my cat or my dog. You know, I mean, maybe some people do, but here we're going to be talking about, take refuge in my cat. That's an interesting idea. We're talking about like higher forms, so like the gods is usually the place to start. Now, even within Buddhism, when we talk about like the different types of gods, it's like lots and lots of different levels. They go these very high, like sort of formless gods, and then they come down to various levels. And some of them are also known as the desire realm gods, and they are the gods are like higher beings than humans, but they're not totally beyond various forms of desire. Anyway, let's get back to the text, and I'll try to point it out from the text of like who's who here. So this first category here, spirits and deities, so in Chinese is gui sin. So that actual term gui there is often like the term for like hungry ghosts. So you could think about this general, but then you put it with gui sin. Is it like one word or is it 2 words? It's kind of like a bit ambiguous, to be honest, in Chinese. But think of that as sort of like minor deities. And it would include, now we have to think here, like we're giving this class in English, so many of you, but probably not all of you, might come from Western or Western influenced cultural backgrounds. And one of the things, of course, is about the legacy of Western and Western Christian culture is that it's meant this kind of, the idea of like beings above or beyond the human realm is kind of like God, God, and then like everything else just kind of gets cleared out. But many other older cultures and just other cultures, not necessarily older, have various forms of like spirits and deities for other things. Tree spirits, river spirits, many different places and natural places have various forms of spirits or deities associated with them. And they can also include like different shrines or different temples. And so if we think about this, say, if we use like a Chinese context here, there are various different deities that may sort of preside over a particular area, or they may be worshipped in a particular temple. And so the idea here being that, okay, so there's a lot of people in this world who are like, well, there's no refuge in money and all these things, but I'll go to the temple and I will seek for refuge and support and safety from those spirits or those deities that are worshipped in the temple. And this is a kind of a common thing. Often people are going, give me the, whatever deity, make some offerings of something. It could be incense. It's almost certainly going to be incense. It could be fruit. It could be animal flesh. It could be meat or fish or something like that. A dead chicken, sacrificing a chicken or some animal like that, making an offering and saying, so-and-so deity, give me the winning lotto numbers. Why? Because I get the lotto numbers and I win the money. And then, you're kind of taking your refuge in this deity, but you're also kind of taking refuge maybe in and then money, if you say you want to win lottery. This kind of thing, right, is really quite common. But if we take this idea here of Guisin, spirits and deities in like a broader sense, many of the different gods, if we look at their backgrounds, we see, this phrase here in Chinese, 好凶杀, delight in violent murder. It sounds like a bit of a shocking statement when you first sort of glance at it, but actually, if you think about it, if we take this in a broader context, some of these minor deities that often accept like sacrifices of animals. I remember when I was living in South Africa as an office monk there at the good old African Buddhist seminary, I learned a lot from my classmates who came from South Africa, Malawi, Tanzania, Congo. And I learned like a little bit, not much, but a little bit about some more traditional African spiritual practices or religious practices. And, the idea of sacrificing an animal to give to different spirits or maybe ancestors or whatever is quite common. Now look, if deities are accepting the sacrifice of other animals, the implication in our text here is like, such beings are not an appropriate place of refuge. They're condoning violence. They're condoning the killing of other animals. I might think, well, sacrifice a chicken and save myself. Well, what is that deity doing for the chicken apart from, ordaining its own execution? But if we think about it even in other terms, look no further than, the God, the wrathful, the vengeful God of the Old Testament, where this God under various names might support various groups of people, but for other groups of people, the result, don't follow the word of God, cities get destroyed, whole groups of people get wiped out in various ways, all sorts of ways, or horrible ways, and that's often attributed to then God or gods. You look at Greek mythology, you look at Roman mythology, you look at Indian mythology, Indic mythology, lots of names for different deities. Deities are often going out there and they're killing various people that, oppose them. Look at a text like the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, the whole thing's set like in a battle, right? Arjuna with Krishna as his charioteer, they're going into a battle to fight against his own cousins. That sort of like difficulty is the whole central theme of the Bhagavad Gita. This idea that because God says go to war, well, technically speaking, the characters in the story, the Kshatriyas, they are the warrior class, and therefore it's their like religious duty to fight wars. And by doing so, then they're actually doing a good thing. If they were to refuse to fight and kill, then that would actually be a bad thing. So when we come back here, this idea of spirits and deities delight in violent murder, it's not just they themselves engage in the killing and destruction of other living beings, they also condone it in others. And the idea being that any creature, any deity, any form that condones violence against others is not a suitable person or suitable being to take refuge in. It's a bit like, I don't know if you've seen those like cartoons. It's got like a cartoon of like two little kingdoms fighting each other, and they're all saying, God is with us and God will support us in conquering the evil, Satan worshippers. And the other side is saying exactly the same thing. Any of these figures that are condoning violence against others could just as easily be condoning that violence against ourselves. So what kind of refuge, what kind of sanctuary is that? So the first line, I think, sums up a really big and broad principle. The second line, the desire around gods, indulge in craving. Here, again, it's kind of like this Indian Buddhist idea of different forms of desire around gods. Do note, in a Buddhist context, that Mara, so Mara, the evil one, who's tempting the Buddha and what have you, is classed as a desire around God. So Mara uses desire to tempt others and lead others away from the path. That's not very good, right? And because, of course, desire is desire for what? It's desire for all those things that we just mentioned above. It's desire for money and fame and fortune and pleasure and all these other things which are ultimately not dependable. Third line, we've got the lone Brahma, dwells in conceit. The Brahma here is kind of like, I think really the nearest equivalent to sort of like the idea of a creator god and maybe some other religious traditions. Of course, from the Buddhist perspective, Brahma didn't create the world. The world came into being through its own processes. It comes into being, it changes, it develops, it starts to decay and collapse, and then the world is kind of emptied of its content, and then another world forms. So it's just like cycle upon cycle, and that's not dependent on this god known as Brahma, but Brahma was the first to appear in the world and therefore thinks that he, she, or it is then the creator of this world. And that's the idea of Brahma dwelling in conceit, this idea of a deity god that thinks that they control the world and created the world, created and controlled, not controlled the world, is then a basis of conceit for this god, and it's based on a misunderstanding. So again, this kind of figure, while much more powerful than us, while much more influential than us, is still not an ultimate place of refuge, right? So there's a kind of a key idea here. And maybe we should end this note of sort of talking about how spirits and deities and gods and what have you are not places of refuge by just adding something. And I think this is worth sort of saying. Buddhism still accepts that these figures are very powerful and very influential. And it's important to note, the gods, by and large, are there due to their virtues. So Brahma, that living being who is presently incarnated as Brahma, is in that position due to his or her own karma, which is a very good karma. Basically, it's from developing a lot of loving kindness and compassion. That's why we have this idea of Brahma Viharas, the divine abidings. And because of developing that very powerful compassion and love for other living beings, that karma has led them to be reborn there. So these are very good living beings. And therefore you can turn to them and you can ask them for support. And Buddhism often does do that. It's often places of offerings to the gods. We can say like worship of the gods, salutations and homage to the gods, but not the idea of refuge in the gods. So you've got to make a really clear distinction here between honoring some kind of figure and taking refuge in them. And here we're talking about refuge. So we need to be clear about that. It doesn't mean that just like anything to do with the gods, we just go, they're all terrible and they're horrible and they're evil and they're bad. Well, by and large, they're not at all. Probably a lot better than we are. But just because they're not ultimate, we shouldn't put them down, but also we shouldn't see them as more than what they are. Okay, that's that line. Now, the next response, of course, is real refuge, the three treasures. And as you can guess, because this is a Buddhist text, the ultimate refuge, the real refuge, is in the three treasures. So let's read this line. 皈依处处求，求自遍十方，究竟皈依处，三宝最吉祥. Seeking refuge everywhere, seeking it throughout the 10 directions. The ultimate place of refuge, the three treasures, is most auspicious. So, this opening lines is sort of this idea that we're seeking. We're going here, we go here, we go there, trying to find something upon which we can rely, a safe place. I think this term refuge has become the standard term in sort of Buddhist English lexicon and kind of the language of Buddhism in English, refuge. But there's a couple of other terms that I think are really worth thinking about as well. One term I like is sanctuary. We've got this idea of, a sanctuary is a safe place, a safe haven. So I think, back in the days of sort of chivalrous war and battle. You know, the fleeing army, maybe the defeated king, you know, goes and hides in a church. The idea being that in a church, the enemy can't come in and kill them. Of course, in history, actually, they did. But you get my point. Like, the refuge isn't a physical place. There's no, like, physical place that can save you. But this idea of sanctuary, like a safe place, or even like safety, is up there with this idea of refuge. And so in these first two lines, it's sort of this idea of we are humans, we're living beings, experiencing all these travails of living in the world, the chaos, the difficulties. We're experiencing happiness along the way as well. But I think if you look at history, times of, you know, sort of great prosperity without any problems are pretty few. And so much of our history is just, you know, peppered with sort of some or other tragedies going on. Without being too doom or gloom, just think of, you know, the last few decades and what's probably going to happen in the next few decades. I see a bit of discussion every now and then, you know, the climate crisis, which is a very real crisis. It's already happening and it's going to get worse. And maybe this present younger generation seeing that and having a lot of like existential angst about that. And I can totally see that. And I think it shouldn't just be the younger generation having that. My generation, as in Generation X, Generation X, ours was a little bit different. Climate thing, it was there, it was known if you knew where to look. But it was, you know, nuclear war. Watching movies and stories about what's going to happen in nuclear war, you know, growing up, thinking about this was something that's quite possibly going to happen. It's also like a different form of like existential, you know, angst. Like, is human race going to survive? Then throw in a few, you know, economic disasters along the way. You know, stock market crashes in the 80s, financial tsunami. When was that? 2008. Now we've got this pandemic, which, while a medical thing, is also causing various crashes in the economy. And of course, just throughout this is war and war and war, which affects certain places to a great degree, but it affects everywhere else as well. And so we're just trying to find some solution. You know, what's the solution? Sex, drugs, rock and roll, political ideologies, ecological ideologies. Perhaps these will alleviate the problem, but if we're looking for an ultimate place of refuge, we have to go outside of this whole cycle. We have to go outside of this whole cycle. I mean, just think of the ecological issues that we're having. I often wonder if, like a, you know, if looking at it from like a Buddhist worldview, to me, seems quite different from not having that worldview, where a certain generation might think, well, it's going to be a disaster, you know, for the next generation or generations down the track. But if you're a Buddhist, you think, well, a couple of generations down the track is just me in my next life. So if I'm making this problem, I'm still going to be the one who has to face it. To me, that's like a really different mindset than just kicking the bucket down the road for somebody else to deal with. So even those solutions are not ultimate solutions, and then the text is telling us the ultimate place of refuge is the three treasures. 三宝最吉祥. Now, let's have a little look at a couple of terms here. We've talked a little bit about this word refuge, sanctuary, safety, support. Let's have a look at the term the three treasures. Obviously, three, that's not a problem. It's the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Though what exactly these terms mean in this context, we're going to get to in a minute, okay? So when we talk about the Buddha, are we talking about like Sakyamuni Buddha? Are we talking about like the Dharma Bodhi Buddha? When we talk about the Sangha, does that mean monks? Does it mean the Buddhist community? So we're going to get to these questions. And if you're already thinking about them, good. I'm glad you're thinking about it. But let's have a look at this term like Jixiang. So in Chinese, Jixiang, translated here as auspicious. Now this is a Chinese text. It's not an Indian text translated into Chinese and translated into English. But just to note that this term here, Jixiang, often is used to translate an Indian word Mangalam. So Mangalam, there's a Mangalam Sutta, which is a very common chant in Tibetan Buddhism. And this idea of auspicious, I mean, if I think about that word in English, auspicious to me is kind of connected with like a bit like fortune telling. Like that would be an auspicious day to build a new house or something like that, whatever. But it kind of has a sense of like goodness, the sense that all is right with the world, that's happiness, it's peace, it's kind of like all good things. So kind of think about it in that way. I've skipped over the term treasure. So sometimes this is translated as the three jewels, like a jewel, like a diamond or what have you. Chinese it's bao. So bao is kind of all different types of treasures and precious things. It can include jewels, so like jewels as like gemstones. Sometimes also the three gems. But the term in the Indian languages, Ratana or Ratna, is called this because it's something that can't be tainted or tarnished. So if you think for a moment, about making things out of iron or making things out of copper or making things out of wood or plastic, they tarnish, they get old, they rust, they get dirty, they get gunky, they rot. But why was gold precious and gold still is precious? Because it's known as a noble metal. It does not tarnish. Pure gold does not tarnish. It doesn't react with anything. It always remains pure. You can put a pile of rotting eggs and garbage into a golden bowl and wash it out, and the gold will be totally untouched by it. If we also think about something like a gemstone, like a diamond, emerald, a ruby, these are also stable things. You can put that jewel in something really gross and disgusting, a pile of rotting cabbage, and you can take it out and rinse it off and it will be untouched. It won't rot or be tarnished by that. So whether we use the term like jewel or gem or treasure, word aside, we need to understand why this word is used in Buddhism and the sense behind it. So the idea being that the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, are things that are untarnished and untarnishable. They will always remain pure. They will always remain in their perfect state, and that is why they are a suitable place of refuge. Anything else is ultimately going to rot. The three stainless treasures of the world, Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. Okay, there's more verses coming up. I'm just going to give you a little sneak preview here to show you what's coming. The next bit we're going to praise for the three treasures, praise for the virtues of the Buddha, praise for the virtues of the Dharma, praise for the virtues of the Sangha. We're going to go through all of those in due course. Maybe not. We'll probably spend about 2 more weeks looking at each of those in turn. So that's our content for today. Thinking about the worldly things and why they're not suitable places of refuge or sanctuary. Things that are even like higher than this world, sort of like the divine realm type thing, the unseen world, but also why they are not suitable places of refuge. And then reflecting on the qualities of the three jewels, which we're going to get into in the next couple of weeks, and why they are auspicious, why they are taintless and pure, and therefore why they are suitable places of refuge. That's what we're going to be looking at next. If you've got the time after this class, don't go and immediately start stuffing your brain with something else. Go outside, walk around if it's a nice day, or sit quietly at home if it's raining outside, and just think about this content. Meditate on it, reflect on it. We often talk about meditation and people think like particular types of like Zazen or Dzogchen, Mahamudra, Chan, Zen, Vipassana, etc., etc. Before we even get that far, we need to do meditation as reflection, right? We're talking about 3 types of wisdom. I'm jumping ahead here. 3 types of wisdom. Wisdom from hearing, wisdom from reflection, or wisdom from cultivation. Contemplating some of these principles of Buddhism is a very important part of the practice, which I think is often overlooked in the way Buddhism is presented outside of Asia. And this is a very important topic. Refuge is the entrance to the path. So I'm going to wrap it up here for today. Thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope to see you back again next week, same time, same channel, for The Way to Buddhahood with Bodhi Tree Buddhism. Thank you everyone. Take care.